You can see all these different other examples. The idea with this one is that we want it to look low resolution. We don't want these to be photorealistic or nice and smooth. We just want these to look like polygons. They look like you can see all the faces of like those trees, which is, again, it's a nice way to introduce yourself to different ways to render stuff out, different ways to model things, and different ways to create it. So you can see in all these instances, they're just really low resolution, or low, I don't want to say resolution, low polygon count, okay? Now, all of the stuff that we're going to learn on this will carry over into the next assignment, which is going to be a product. As long as we can model stuff low resolution, the next step is somewhat simple to go to a higher resolution and start refining what it's supposed to look like, okay? So your sketches, remember, will be just different props that you're going to use for your scene. There's also a whole bunch of tutorials on YouTube. I'm not going to be able to cover every single thing that you might want to model, so I would definitely recommend, if it's something specific, to go to YouTube and look for something very specific on how to do this specific thing inside there. The concepts are still the same, but as new modelers, you may want to see how somebody else did it. Typically, if it's something new that I'm going to be going into modeling, let's say I never modeled a dragon, but I've modeled a person, I would still watch a how to model a dragon video just to see what their tips and tricks are before I jump into mine, okay? And some of these are pretty long, like a half hour each. Some are shorter, 14 minutes and so on, okay? So more stuff to kind of look at. This is some 3D work that Billy, our other Intro to 3D teacher, worked on. This is nice because it's kind of this collaboration of not photorealistic, not super low res, but it's kind of like that mix between them. And it's a mixture of 2D animation as well. So the platform, the train, and the subway are all 3D elements. And then the rest of this is all 2D elements that were drawn frame by frame inside here. And it's a loopable animation. So you can see, obviously, it's looping over and over again. All right, so this is on Stash Magazine's website, so you can check it out and see. There's, you know, a model of it and everything. This is also some more stuff where we can take kind of the same concepts that we're doing and just start refining them, making them look more realistic. Another one. Okay, so even though this is a low-res city, it builds two other things that you could obviously utilize. And what's neat too is that a lot of these low-res cities are actually becoming more popular. Jeff was just showing me, what's it called again? Miracle Workers opening sequence is basically a low-poly environment that they animated as their opening credits. Okay, so these concepts you'll see across the board kind of apply in many different areas. Not that yet. Go here. Okay. So don't worry about grabbing a paper yet. I'll have it printed. You can come up and grab it later. I'm going to go through the sheet and then we can see that. So this will be our stylized environment. You can call it low poly, but typically it's a stylized environment is what people refer to it as. Working with Cinema 4D to better understand navigation, cameras, modeling, shaders, cloning, the whole gamut. So we're just taking the same stuff we learned in the mini room and this text animator and just going a little bit deeper into those areas, okay? We'll build a low poly environment on a floating island. We'll ensure our geometry looks solid and materials look appropriate. Using of cloners to duplicate props for animation purposes, animating a camera slowly moving towards the island, animating via effectors and fields, the pieces floating away and disappearing, or vice versa. So one of the things we'll do is, like your text, how we animated the text kind of like floating away or vanishing. Same thing here. We're going to have the entire island be able to be cleared off so that all the stuff will just like float away and disappear. Or you can have the stuff float back into place and have it appear, okay, however you want to do it. Organizing, effective shading and lighting as well. One of the things I'm going to pass back your mini rooms things. For the most part, people labeled all the stuff in their objects. They labeled all their materials. Layers, most of the people didn't get the layer stuff. So I'll show that when I go into Cinema, but make sure we're labeling our layers and putting everything on layers, okay? You'll turn in the artwork, so make sure you have your artwork set up or you're using it as you go. And this doesn't mean like one sketch or two sketches. You should have basically like a sheet of sketches. Don't think that because you're working in 3D that you don't have to touch a piece of paper. You should touch a piece of paper for everything you do. It helps you kind of work out some of those issues ahead of time before you get into the software, okay? You'll be turning in your project folder with everything except for the rendered sequence images, okay? So you'll have a movie. I want the movie, but not all the images that you rendered out. I think that was the one thing that everyone who turned in their stuff had all the rendered images in there. We'll also have a high-res still, meaning that we'll have this animation that goes by, but we'll also have a still image of just a nice thing, just like we saw in the Google Images. I closed it, didn't I? Yes, I did. Yep, you'll have a still image of your environment as well. Our movie will be 5 seconds at 30 frames per second, 960 by 540. The still image will be 3000 by 2400. That is basically an 8 by 10. So those things up there are all 8 by 10s, except for the couple in the end that aren't. So this will give us a nice resolution to print out. If we rendered it at 960 and printed that, it would look like crap. It'll be like this big. We need lots of pixels to print it out. Now, if you think of like when you see a movie at the theater, if you're going to like IMAX, those originally they were like 4,000 pixels for each frame. Now they're like 8,000 pixels for each frame. Huge stuff. So this is minimal compared to like some of the other stuff. 16 points, 2510, blah, blah, blah. Questions on that? Oh, good. Never any questions on that. All right, so let's close this. Let's close this. Let's get into Cinema. All right, so here's the idea is we're going to create different props for this. So obviously there's an island. That's the starting point of this. We'll have different other items, mountains, whatever it is. Everyone's scene can be different. You do not need to follow my exact tutorial for how to do this. The idea should still stay the same though. It's low polygon. When I turn on my lines here, I should see low divisions. I shouldn't see a super smooth, dense mesh. I shouldn't see a nice rounded tree. I should see blocky trees, blocky bushes, blocky mountains. That's the idea, okay? You'll see I have a little village right here. I have trees right there. I have my castle right here. And if I take my plane animator, my linear field, and I just hit play, as long as it plays nice. Let's see. I was getting a weird little glitchy thing happening earlier where it wasn't doing anything. So now you can see, there goes all my stuff. Even the mountains disappear. Okay? So you could have your animation go that way, everything disappears, or you can have it go the other way. Everything kind of pops in there. Okay? Now this is a cool thing too. Going further than the assignment is to have something that's not just straight up out of the camera, is to have these kinds of things. If I were to put a camera really close to the scene here, click off, there we go, and then I played it like this, these are typically like really cool shots to have and add this into a bigger animation. Okay, so if you had something where you're like, I really want to have a more complete animation or a more finished type of animation, you know, this is a cool shot regardless. I mean, that's pretty sweet. Okay, all right, so let's get started on how to do this. P drive there, 2510. All right, so we have our project folder, same thing, copy this, rename it to environment, boom, there's my environment one, and Cinema. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with a mountain, or with an island. Typically, you're gonna start off with some sort of primitive inside here. This cone is typically a good shape to start with, okay, because it's basically like an island upside down, right? So I'm going to flip this around. Whoops. I'm actually going to say just negative y here. That makes perfect sense. Okay. And I'm going to look at my divisions. For this entire thing, it helps to have your divisions on the entire time so you can constantly be on the alert of if something gets too heavy in divisions. If I crank this up and crank that up, that's not going to be a low polygon item. That's going to be high polygon. under the display shading lines. Okay, so now I have this. Now I could hit the C key and start pushing and pulling points to get the stuff to look like it's low poly, but I want to use something more procedural, something I can quickly change and have it affect the entire object, okay? So under this purple thing here, there's one called the displacer, right? So I'm going to create the displacer, drop it under the cone, and the idea with this is that it's going to take some sort of picture, some sort of texture, and move the points around. If it's in a white area of the picture, it will push it out. If it's in a black area, it will keep it there, okay, or push it in. So I'm going to go to the displacer, it's under the cone, and then I'm going to go to the shading, and this is where I tell it specifically what item is going to be affecting, okay? So for something like this, noise is a perfect way to do that. So if I just click on noise, instantly you'll see how that now is affecting that surface. So instead of me having to go through and push and pull all these points, that displacer automatically pushes and pulls them. Now if I change what that noise looks like, it will change what that looks like, okay? And the idea with this is that because it's linked to the cone, I've never hit the make edit button on the cone, I can still go back to the cone and tweak the settings. If I realized, oh, I need this to be more divisions or less divisions, I can click back on this and still change my divisions to change what it's going to look like, okay? So as long as I haven't hit C on that or clicked that button, I should be good. So there's the noise. I'm going to click on the noise. And I'm just going to play with some settings. Now this is your chance just to kind of screw around and just see what you can get. There's no rhyme or reason to any of this. If I pick this one, this is a different noise pattern that looks like that. If I pick Luca, it looks like this. If I pick that one, it looks like that. Okay, you can see this one, obviously I'm getting more like weird stuff happening there. If I do this one, okay. So the idea here is just looking at it, trying to find something that looks cool. I could also play with the global scale. So imagine that this is a picture. The bigger the picture, the bigger those details are going to be. Okay, the smaller the picture, the tighter the details. So just so you can see that a little bit clearer, I'm going to add a bunch of divisions. Okay, actually I'll go like 200. There we go. You're not going to 200, I'm going to 200 just so you can see this. So you can see how wavy this area is right here. If I set my scale to, let's say, 5, now I have a whole bunch of stuff because this texture is super tiny. That was too low probably. Let's go to 20. Nope, still too low. Let's go to 30. We'll find it. 50. There we go. Okay, so now you can see that texture is basically being repeated over and over and over again. This is not a low polygon thing. We wouldn't want that. So just so you can see what some of these numbers do. 100 is actually probably a decent one if I was going to use that. So let's go back to 30. I may want to actually go, let's say, height segments. I'm going to go 10 or 15, and this is 20. There we go. All right, back to my displacer, back to my noise. The more contrast, the more pushing and pulling we'll have there. Instead of a gradual push or a pull or whatever, if I just go to this contrast down here on that noise, you'll see how I can really start to make that effect a lot more apparent. Basically, the pushing is going to be pushed in more, the pulling is going to be pulled out more, okay, and vice versa. I can also play with the brightness to control where things are getting moved to. I could also clip, okay, this is just basically just adjusting what this looks like. That's the whole idea, is it's adjusting that. Once you've kind of wrapped your brain around how these black and white images work for this kind of stuff, it applies across the board. Imagine I had a plane and I wanted the MACA logo to pop out of it. If I had a black image and a white MACA logo, I can do animations based off that. I can have the MACA logo being displaced off of a surface just by using, instead of a noise, I used a picture of the MACA logo, okay? So for now, I think that's going to be good. I think I will actually just go to the cone though and maybe make this a little bit taller. There we go. It looks more mountainy, right? Or island. I can also go to my displace, go to the object, and I can play with the height here. So that's another way to do it. I can play with the strength, which is kind of like Okay, there's the effect, but I just want to diminish it, kind of like opacity on a layer or something. You can also play with how it's affecting it. In our area, this doesn't matter so much. Same thing here. You can control how it's being projected. We don't need to worry about that. All right. So now that I'm happy with the way this looks, I'm going to click on the cone, and I'm going to right-click and say Current State to Object. Okay. Now you'll see that it doesn't delete the old one. It keeps the old one there. That's always good to have on hand. I screw up later down the line. I need to go back and tweak it. Instead of remaking the entire thing, there it is. Okay. So I'm going to go to a layer, and I'm going to add this to a layer. And this is just going to be a construction layer. And everything that I use for construction purposes, I'm typically going to drop on this layer so that I can always go back to it and get to it if I need to. So this is on a layer. Whenever I grade something, I click the layers off, the eyeball off, and I shouldn't see that item there. Now, in this case, the cone has the color here. The displacer doesn't. So I'm just going to drag this down. So now both of those items do. Okay, it's very important you make sure that they all have something on there. Now this isn't going to go away because there's already a cone on top of it. So we'll just turn these off, these two, and then we'll be good. All right, so now I need to fix this because this top piece looks weird. So I'm just going to go to my faces, double click this face, and just delete it. Okay, I'm just going to remake that top face. It's a lot easier than trying to sew or stitch those things back together. Now I'm going to grab this, and if I look at this from a side view, you'll be able to see this. It's kind of like wobbly. If I do what I'm going to do next, which is close this off, that high point here and the low point next to it will actually like streak towards the middle, and we'll get this like pinch right in the middle, and it looks weird. Okay, so I'm going to first flatten this out. So I'm just dragging this down. So now this is perfectly flat. There's no bumpiness to it. How do you do what? You just grab the faces and delete it. Now I'm going to go to Close Polygon and click. Okay, so now that's closed off. Those two things are connected. There's no gap between them. Okay, in order for us to get divisions up here, I need to do something to it. We've seen in the mini room assignment there's a bunch of tools that are inside here. One of them that I'm going to use is going to be the extrude inner, which is further down than this is showing. So I'm just going to hit MW and just click and drag on that face. Okay, now I have divisions nice and flat. I'm going to go to my attributes and add a couple subdivisions here, and now I have plenty of subdivisions to create that. Be aware that if you take that area here and you start to like warp it and distort it, it's going to be harder to place items actually on that surface. Just something to be aware of. It's possible, you can do it, it's just a matter of it's going to be a bit more work. Anytime you do a tool inside of Cinema, you get this option over here the second you're in that tool. When I click off of it, this doesn't affect that anymore, or it shouldn't affect it. All right, it still is affecting it, but it's like breaking now, so I'm going to undo that. Okay. I think this is, yeah, see now it's not affecting it anymore. Let me do this again, click and drag, pull this up, pull this down. There we go. Just need to make sure I don't go too far. All right, so I'm going to hit this point, and if you watch, I'm pointing at my screen. You watch where those 2 points are really close to each other. As I offset that, see how they're crossing. We don't want that because we get this weird thing that happens. So I'm going to bring it to about there, and then just scale that down. And then now if I needed to, I can use the knife loop and just add a couple more divisions. Okay. Now I could, on top of this, now that the whole mountain is done, I could go back to this cone, grab the displacer, drop that in again, and add, let's say, another noise, and then I would get this whole noise pattern on top of that if I wanted to do that. I don't want to do that, but you can do that. Okay. You may want to do other stuff too. You may want to create like a rim so that it looks like the island has more of like a grassiness to it, and the dirt is kind of stuck underneath it. Okay, so if I go to this, I'm going to add a loop, let's say right here, and I'm just going to grab these two and just scale these out. So now you see how I have more of this kind of like it's wrapping around. I'm also going to put a bevel around this edge just to kind of keep this nice and smooth. Something like that, and maybe another division. There we go. Okay, so there's my island. Now this is pretty small. Whenever I create a cube, you can see how big this cube is compared to the island. So I'm going to scale this up to like a crazy big size. There we go. Okay, so now when I create a cube, it's probably an appropriate size cube for, let's say, a house or something inside my village area. I'll also bring this down to the ground. That makes more sense. And I'm also going to save my stuff so I don't lose that environment. Scenes, Sarcona. There we go. All right. So now, before I move on to the next step, I'm going to look at the rendering part. This part will be something that we need to pay attention to with everything we model. I'm going to turn off my lines, so I go back to this. And you can see that even though it looked like it was pretty jagged before, it's not really jagged here. If I were to render this, that's what it looks like. I want to see every facet. So when I have a face here and a face there, I want to see those two faces. We're going to flash back for a second. Virtua Fighter. If you're a Rockstar game person, you might remember this game, Virtua Fighter. This is from, what, 1990 something? This was like the first time they ever had actual 3D polygon characters in a video game that moved around. Up until this point, they would use sprites, which are basically like hand-drawn or pictures or something of characters. So when Mario's moving, it's basically like this picture, then this picture, and they just cycle between those two pictures. Here, it's actual pieces of geometry. Now, if you look at the way that their arms are, that's very faceted. You can see every single one of their faces. Because of the technology at the time, they couldn't do what the technology automatically does now. This is Virtua Fighter, I don't know what when they're on, 6 or 7? 6. So that's Virtua Fighter now. Obviously, they've come a long way. These things are nice and smooth. Now, even though they look super smooth in this case, they still have a low amount of polygons. In order for any video game to be able to be interactive the way it is and move as quickly as it does, you have to keep your polygons as low as possible. Think of how long it took you to render some of your stuff. It's rendering it in real time. In order to do that, you need low polygons. You need things to be optimized, okay? So their little trick that takes us from the blockiness to the smoothness, which is currently on, is this guy here, which is a Phong tag. Basically what it's doing is it's looking at this face and this face, and even though they might be at like a 90-degree angle, it's saying, okay, you want those to look smooth, so I'm going to make it look smooth. And it just kind of like automatically softens that edge so we don't see it so hard. If I take this angle down, now we get the blockiness, okay? And so now when I render this, now we see all of that blockiness happening. All right, so that Phong angle, typically we want it down. If we pull it up, now it's like way too soft. We've even lost that line that was right there. Okay, right there is where it was. That's good. Now you may want to find maybe not exactly 0, maybe like 10 looks cool. Right, maybe this area looks big and this one looks kind of blocky. That might be a nice way to do it. You can always come back and change this, so don't think that you have to get it locked in. I just want you to be aware of it going forward. Okay. Now, I also want to give this some textures. The texturing for this is going to be a little bit different than we've done on past assignments so far. Going to. I'm going to make a material, and I'm going to have 2 materials on this. One of them is obviously going to be the dirt. The other one's going to be the grass area. So on the dirt area, let's see. I'm going to go with the color. I'm going to go to texture. And I'm going to add under effects, ambient occlusion. Okay? Now, ambient occlusion, if you remember from the definition stuff, basically where we have areas where we have pockets, where we have little bits of things touching each other, we'll get these like black or darker lines. So instead of having it on the overall scene, which we'll do too, this allows us to lock it into just that surface, okay? So the color will actually be based off of that. So I'm going to click on that ambient occlusion button here, and then let me assign it so we can just see what happens, okay? We probably won't see a huge difference yet. Yeah, it's pretty just white all over. I'm going to go to the white color in here, and I'm just going to give this a brownie kind of color. So there we go. So that's my dirt color for now. Remember, I can always come back and change it. For my reflectance, some items you may want to have reflection on. Dirt, I think I can get away without having reflection. If you had a stream, like some water, I'd want to have reflection on there to catch some of the glistening from the water. If I have dirt, probably not. Grass, probably not. Trees, probably not, right? So just think about the item, and then if you do want reflection, it's simply a matter of, we can actually probably leave it as this kind of reflection because it's kind of cartoony or stylized. And then just kind of making it softer like that. So pulling the width up, pulling the fall off, about there. That gives it just kind of overall coloring. And then you can also tint it if you wanted to actually tint the color. I don't, so I'll put it back to white. All right, so there's my brown. Now I'm going to go to the top part, and I'm going to grab the faces for the top part and then assign that a different color. So I'm going to duplicate my dirt. I'm going to rename it grass. And I don't want a reflection on this. And I click on the ambient occlusion, click on that, and then pick a grassy kind of color. It's good enough for now. Okay. I'm going to go to my faces here, and I'm going to pick on this middle face. Now what I want to do is I want to grab all the pieces that would be grass, which in this case I'm going to try to go all the way to, yeah, probably here I think is as far as I'm going to go. And instead of me doing what you guys might do because you want to do it the hard way, not doing that, I'm going to click on this first one, and then under select, these are all different ways we can select different things, okay? One of them, huge time saver, is grow selection. So we have this item selected, it'll grow out, and then grow out, and grow out, and grow out, okay? Grow selection. You'll see the hotkey is U and then Y. So I'm going to hit U, Y, U, Y, U, Y, U, Y. And one more. There we go. And then there's also one shrink selection, which you could also do, okay? And there's also invert in here somewhere, right there. Select all, deselect, okay? So I have that. Simple, drag this, boom. Now we have green. Okay, render it again. There we go. Okay, so now let's give this a name. So this is island. Name all your stuff. You will have lots of things in here. You don't want to get confused with any of them. Let me create a tree first. So create a tree. I'm going to make a cylinder. Turn my divisions back on. Too many divisions in here, so let's cut these down to maybe 8. That's a good size. I don't need caps on this. My tree, I'm not going to see the bottom of it, and the top of it is going to be like inside the tree, so I don't need that. Back to object, back to this. I'm going to scale that down, scale this down, scoot that up. Okay. I'm not too concerned with where it is in the world right now. Eventually, as I model stuff, I model it one scale, just kind of proportionate, and then I can group it all and scale it down to whatever I need, okay? So typically my tree is going to be probably this big, but I don't like to work that big. All right, so there's my tree. These are going to be kind of like pine trees. I'm going to go to cone. I'm going to, scoot this up. Same thing with the height segments. Let's say maybe 6 on this one. On the rotation segments, probably only need 1 division there. And then it's just a matter of kind of positioning these. So that'll be the bottom piece. It doesn't matter that it's sticking through, that'll be adjusted. Oops. I'm also keeping everything I model right at the center. If you keep it right at the center, your life is like 100 times easier. I'm going to duplicate this one upwards and then just like shrink that in. duplicate it up just by holding Control key. Duplicate it up. Duplicate it up. Beautiful. Okay. I could also go through and, let's say, rotate these if I wanted, just to. All right, that's good. That's kind of interesting looking tree. I can repurpose some of my textures. If my tree trunk is going to be brown, the same brown as my dirt, I can use that same dirt on that tree trunk. Same thing with the grass and this, I could do that as well. Eventually we'll get into utilizing multiple textures, so we can basically assign one texture to something and have it randomly pick from a selection of colors. So if we wanted all of these to be green, but kind of random arrays of green, we can do that, okay? So eventually we'll do that. For now, we're just assigning basic colors. I don't want the same green for my grass and my trees, so I will call this tree. I will go to my ambient occlusion. I will click here. I'll push it more towards this, a little bit desaturated, and maybe a little bit darker. And drop that onto these. There we go. Beautiful. All right, so now I'm going to take all my stuff here. I don't need to label each individual piece, branch 1, branch 2, branch 3. That's not anything we need to do. But I will group these and then give these a name, tree. And now I'm going to scale it down to the correct size. I'm also going to put my pivot in the right spot. When I scale this, notice how the bottom lifts up off the ground. That's annoying to have to scale it and then move it, and scale it and move it. If I hit the L key, go to my move tool and just slide this down. Right about there. I can middle click here and get this like right lined up. That's good. That's perfect. All right, so now it's right at the bottom. So now when I hit L and then I go to scale, it scales right from the bottom, and then I don't have to worry about it. This will help too once I've duplicated these in the cloner and I have a bunch of these and I want them all to scale down to go away. Now they're going to scale from the bottom, where before they would have scaled from the middle, which looks kind of weird. Okay, cool. So I have my one tree. I'm going to scale it down to an appropriate amount. That's too small. Obviously, your world is going to be different scales, so you may want lots of trees. If I want lots of trees, I would keep it like this. Now to our cloner. I'm going to create a cloner. I'm going to go to, let's say, honeycomb array. Let's change this to XZ. There we go. And let's change this to endpoint and pull this in. Endpoint basically says don't go any further than this. That way I can add more and it won't push them further. If I had this at the other one, per step, as I add more, they get further and further away. So typically you want this to be at endpoint so they don't get further and further away. There we go. So there's my trees. Now I could leave the trees like this, but that looks stupid having all the trees, number one, the same size, and number two, in these perfect rows. Okay? So I want to add some effectors to this. Same effectors that we used when we did the text. I'm going to add a random one to this. And I'm just going to control where it's random. I don't want the Y to be random because now it's going to like move away from the ground. That doesn't work. But if I randomize the X and the Z position, let's maybe put this at 150 and 150. There we go. So now we have this basically just like trees all over this island. I'm also going to go to scale, uniform, absolute, and -0.5. So now I have some big trees and some small trees. I'm also going to go to, if I can make this a little bit bigger, go to rotation, and in this one, type in 360. That's a more subtle one, but what it's doing is rotating each tree a random amount so that they're not all lined up. They're already rotated. It's not going to be a huge deal, but you can see it does rotate all the trees. Now, once I have that set up, I can just go to this cloner and then just add more. Like, there's a bunch of trees here, a bunch of trees there. Even trees are kind of neat because if they're touching each other like this, that's not a big deal because trees do touch each other like that. When you have buildings doing that, that's more of an issue. Okay? So that looks awesome. I like the way this looks. Sweet. So my trees are done. I will call this cloner_tree. And I also like to put the whatever effectors I'm using too, give them a name. You will have several different effectors, and what you don't want to have is random, 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 and not know which one's affecting what, okay? So keep all that stuff together. You can even group stuff like this and just say tree stuff. And that way you know all the tree stuff is inside that one. Okay, let's see, what else do I want in here? I may want, what was the other thing I was going to add? Oh, I may want little huts or something, right? Little houses, something. So I'm going to start off with a cube. And this is where you can do a little bit more modeling than just the basics that we had. Scale this thing down still. And now I'm looking at proportions. So there's my tree. How big is my house compared to the tree, right? Maybe that's appropriate. I can adjust it. What are the proportions of this? Let's say that, okay? I'm going to add a division down the middle. Sure, I guess that way. I was going to do it the other way. I can do it that way. There we go. All right, so I'm going to hit C, and then I'm just going to grab this edge and pull it up. There we go. And then I'm going to grab this, and hit D to extrude, and just extrude this up, and say preserve groups. You didn't preserve groups. Hold on. That should have connected those. It did not connect those. Oh, I know why. Never mind. I'm going to go D again. Drag this up. So same thing. This maximum angle, it's basically if these two faces are like this and it pulls it apart, it thinks that they're two separate faces. I want them to say, stay connected. So I just keep tweaking this number until it changes. I have to go the other way, I'm sure. Yes, I do. There we go. So I had to go over 100. Then it connected those. That's what I wanted. And then now I'm going to grab these and this. The nice thing about this is that we can really exaggerate some of these features here. Right? That's cool. So there's my house. I'll add a little door to this. That's a huge door. Let's just scale that down. Tinier. Remember, until I hit C, I can't scale this non-uniformly. I have to grab these dots. Okay. Now, as I move this down, I'm kind of watching for it to go through the ground. It's at the ground now, so I push it in. Okay, my house is floating, so I'm going to push the house down too. Do the same thing. All right. So there's my door. I could add windows too the same way. Think about how we did the windows or how I showed the picture frames in the mini room assignment. Those are the same thing. You could add just those same exact picture frame type things. I can click this, reset these to probably 5 and 5. That's good. I'll hit C. I'll grab this face, extrude this inward, get rid of all these subdivisions. There we go. Extrude this in. There we go. So now we have a window. And that's an appropriate height. Cool. All right, now before I go further with duplicating the window, I'm going to duplicate this and then just give it a color. Window. Color here. This is not going to be transparent, but it'll be shiny, so I'm going to go with kind of like a glass blue color like that. Go to my reflectance, maybe sharpen this reflection instead. Oops. There we go. And then I'm going to grab the face for this window, drag that onto it, and then duplicate this. Doesn't matter which one I duplicate, I just need something to go off of. Window, frame, don't need reflection, I will go here to the color and give this kind of like an off-white kind of color. And this is where that invert comes in handy. Invert, see, it grabs the rest. I'm going to drop that on there. Then here's my door. We'll drop this on the door. My roof, what color will the roof be? Let's grab the cube here. There's no real good shortcut for this one, just selecting it. If you accidentally assign a material to it and then you realize you missed a face, it's always best to delete the material because you don't want to have too many of these things. Every time you assign a material to selection, it creates that whole setup here. You don't want to have too many of those. So this will be a roof. And we're going to have some fun color there. It'd be like a dark purpley blue. And then we'll invert. Oops. And then same thing here. I'm just going to give this a color of a brick color, I guess. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my cube here, which is my window, and just duplicate this a couple times. And then duplicate it a couple times to that side. There we go. Cool. So again, I don't have to label all the stuff, but I'm going to grab all of this, group it together. There we go. Make sure the pivot is at the bottom. It's not, so I'm going to jump to this view. If my trees get in the way, I just turn that cloner off for the trees, and then I can see where my house is. I hit L, put the pivot down there, I turn that back on. And then now I just clone my houses. One in the Y direction here. Maybe I want the houses to be smaller, so let me scale these down. If I scale the original one down, it scales all of them down. I'll set this to endpoint, which is what it is. I'll set the endpoint a bit further. Now this is where it's going to get a bit tricky because we have, oops, come on. There we go. We're going to have all these houses and all the trees, and we just have to make sure that they're not colliding with each other. MoGraph, effector, random, and then this will be random house, cloner house. All right, so now if we look around, we should see if any of the trees and the houses are colliding. I don't see any right away. I do see one of my houses is gone. So let's put this back to, oh, I forgot to take my Y to 0. There we go. Yep. This is one in a weird spot. Obviously, it's right next to two trees, but that still works. I may want to add again that rotation. The scale, I don't think I really need to worry about the scale of it because houses are pretty much the same size. You could, obviously, but I think that's fine there. Cool. There we go. So that one, obviously, the house is going through it. So I'm going to go to my cloner and just move my cloner. Okay, so that's one way to do it is if you can just offset where your houses are or your buildings are or whatever it is you're cloning. If you can just move it around, great. You can also rotate it or scale it. That also works. The other thing you can do is go to that random, and under the effector, there's this seed number. Anytime you do something random, it's basically like picking from a random list. So number 1, gets these values, number 2 gets these values, number 3 gets these values. If we change the list, which is what this seed is, it'll just pick different positions for things. Okay, so you may find like, okay, this one works. It doesn't because there's a house with a tree going through it there, right? And sometimes it is like you will play with this for like 10 or 15 minutes just trying to get it so that it doesn't do that. And in some cases it may be inevitable, like, okay, this is going to go through, so I'm going to do my best to just make sure it's hidden from camera so that my camera is never like, you know, zoomed in on that one house where the tree is going like right through the front of it, like that one back there probably. All right, so now let's hit render and see what we're looking like so far. Oh, it's so beautiful. All right, so now without any lights in the scene, without any environments, you can see that we're still getting these things at the bottom. That's what that ambient occlusion thing is doing, is it's creating ambient occlusion automatically. You can't see that up there, why doesn't anyone tell me these things? Let me brighten this up. So I'm going to add an environment here. I'm going to go to physical sky. Then we'll render this. There we go. So you can see that a bit better. There are some areas in here where we are getting these darker shadows where we're actually like making contact with the ground, okay? And if you remember from the lighting and shading thing when I talked about the physical sky, you can change all the time and location of that. You can rotate it around to change where the sun's coming from. That obviously changes where the shadows are going, which changes what we're seeing, okay? All right, so this is the same process for every single thing that we do. If we have any items that are standalone items, let's say that I built, I'm just going to grab a whatever item, this oil tank. I want this oil tank and I only want one of them, okay? In order for me to do any kind of animation on it where we get it to go away, it still has to have that cloner on it, okay? So even if I need just the one oil tank, I would still put a cloner on it and just set the number to 1. Okay. Now, the reason for this is because eventually, let me just organize my stuff a little bit so I don't go too crazy. That's good. House, group that. House stuff. Okay. So eventually what we're going to do is on each one of the cloners, we're going to go and do our plane effector. And then we'll add the linear field, just like our text pieces. Okay. And then let me just take the plane effector so that it scales to -1. There we go. So eventually we're going to do this, where we animate this thing kind of going through and making all the stuff disappear. Now we're going to do one of these. So I'm just going to have one plane effector that does it. So I want to be able to assign it to all of those things. So if I take the cloner for the houses, go to its effector, make sure that's there, go to the tree cloner, make sure that this plane effector is in there. Come on. Cloner. Oh, wrong one. No? Are you already in there? Did I already have it selected? That's a good question. Let's see. Oh, the trees are in there. The houses aren't, so I must have not added the houses. There we go. Okay, so now when I go here and I do this, you'll see that they all disappear. Okay. Now when I get to the tanker, obviously the tanker doesn't do anything because that's still not part of that. If I didn't have it in a cloner, I would have to do all the stuff manually. I don't want to do stuff manually. So I'm going to go to my oil tanker cloner, drop this in there as well. And now that oil tanker will also shrink and disappear. Okay, even though I have one, I still put it inside that group. Okay. Now, just as a preparation, we're not actually going to use that setup. We're going to use a group effector. And a group effector is basically, we might have, let's go to here, my other one. If you look at all the different random things that I have inside here, all the different cloners I have inside here, if I change one thing on that, I have to go through each one of those cloners and reassign something. So let's say I added a random, I have to go to each one of those. Let's say I added, what's the other one? delay, I would have to go through and add it to each one of those. If I assign a group to it, anything I put inside the group affects everything, okay? Affects everything inside that the group is assigned to. So I'm going to go to this one, drop the group inside here, go to this one, drop that group inside there, go to this one, drop the group inside here, okay? So now the group does nothing at the moment. I'm going to go and add to the group a plane effector, and I'm going to go to the group and add a random. I'm going to go to my fall off, yes. Go to my random, use the same fall off. And the -1, 1. There we go. All right, so now all of these are affecting it. So any new items I create, I just drop this group in there, and the group has all the other stuff that I want to do to it. If I change something later, I can update the group, and it updates everything, okay? So you don't need to worry about that yet, but just so you can see it's coming down the line, okay? So the idea is create your island, start creating some very simple items, start cloning them, putting them around your scene. Make sure you're labeling your stuff. Make sure you're adding them to layers. Here is my sky stuff, so I'm going to just call this new object. Environment. Here's my oil tanker. Tank. Make sure I open it up and assign both items to it, otherwise it doesn't get it. Same thing with my house. I can grab all of these things, make a new layer. There it goes. House. And this is an easy way for you to be able to turn things on and off, especially when you get into the parts where you need to see between stuff or around stuff. All my trees. And my island. And I'll even throw my effectors into a group too, just so they're not left alone. Sweet. Okay. So save, and then you continue on from there. Maybe not next class, but Monday I'll go through some more stuff. Here's how I model these other things. Wednesday next week I'll do the same thing. Just showing different ways to model different things. Or maybe I'll do those outside of class, that way you can just work in class. That might be a better way. I'll figure that out. That's it. That's how you're going to start it. Questions yet? No. Okay.